fat. Animals eat less. 4 little words. But these 4 little words are probably the reason I'm standing on stage today. And I wasn't going to give this story, but the context of why I'm here. In 2019, we were weighing and weaning calves, and as the cows were coming across the scale, I was like, oh, this is bad. They're heavier, they're bigger than they were last year. And so I was quite disappointed because obviously we were trying to get cow size down. But then I was kind of looking at the cows and I was like, you're not actually bigger, you're just fatter. And so I didn't think much about it. And then after the winter, I totted up all our feed because I like to know what they've eaten over the winter. And they'd actually eaten 20% less feed over that winter. And once again, I was kind of like, oh, that's a bit of a light bulb moment. And then in lockdown, you know, listening to a lot of podcasts, and I heard those 4 words, fat animals eat less. And I thought, there's really something going on here. And it just sent me down a total rabbit hole, and it is why I'm here today. Now, like Rob, I kind of regret having quite such a long title, and so I'm not going to read it out. But I would really like to thank my sponsors, the Royal Highland and Agricultural Society of Scotland, and the Worshipful Company of Farmers with Saddles for making my Nuffield adventure possible. And I'm really, really proud to stand on this stage today as the first scholar from the County of Sutherland, and it's a place I'm really lucky to call home. Now, I know many of you in this room will have heard hundreds of presentations over the year on livestock, and you're probably wondering if you can stay awake as I drone on about fat females for the next 10 minutes. But livestock is and always will be a really important part of UK farming. And whilst this may seem a bit simple or a bit basic or niche, and we can sit in this room and talk about concepts and ideas, the truth is that if our average on-the-ground farmer can get the basics right, then that can deliver prosperity for our farming businesses, our rural communities, our environment, and our animals. And I guess the thing about this topic is it felt like something that a commercial farmer like me could really easily get to grips with and really easily implement. And so I think it's why it's time to get fired up about fat. So one of the challenges of living in the North Highlands, which is a beautiful part of the world, is that we have incredible summers, really long daylight hours, nice warm weather. We can grow more grass than you can poke a stick at. But it is very much tempered with our long, wet, dark winters. They are inevitably expensive and they can be stressful with high labour and feed inputs. It is winter that puts our animals under pressure and dents in our profits. So when I heard those 4 little words, I wondered, can we even out our seasons simply by selecting females that are better suited to seasonal extremes? Can we find animals that are genetically able to put on and hold body condition better than others? And if fat animals really do eat less, then what impact can that have on our livestock and our systems? So before continuing, I'm going to talk a lot about body condition score. So here's a quick BCS 101. Simply put, it is the physical and or visual assessment of the fat and muscle across the lower back of an animal. And whilst I talk about fat, actually, the muscle part there is important too. It's measured from 1 to 5, with 1 being very thin and 5 being very fat, and in some countries, cattle are scored 1 to 9. Scoring is usually carried out by farmers at key handlings at different times of the year, but it is far from an exact science. Now, I'm not here to argue that BCS is important. We have known that for decades. That is nothing new. And recommendations do exist for different types of animals at different times of the year. But are these recommendations based on our current animals and systems? And if they are, then do we think those animals and systems are fit for the future? We're encouraged to carry out BCS scoring regularly and manage our stock accordingly, and that usually means preferentially feeding anything not up to scratch. And yet, despite understanding the importance of BCS, there's been very little recording or focus on it when it comes to supplying commercial farmers with rams and bulls. We've been really good at measuring and selecting for carcass traits like fat, muscle, and growth, though arguably fat became a bit of a dirty word, and there were many actively selecting against it. So did we lose sight of our easy fleshing animals, perhaps replacing the easy bit with a bag of feed? Have we ended up with high input commercial livestock systems because our pedigree systems are high input? Now, I knew my gut answer to these questions, but it was important to start with the research. And I'm going to be frank, I'm a simple livestock farmer, and I got pretty out of my depth at times with geneticists and academics. But I was really, really grateful for their time and enthusiasm. Now, much to my disappointment, there isn't one nice, easy genetic marker that singles out BCS. Maternal traits, as Rob discussed, are quite complex, and phenotype is always going to be a really important part of that assessment. But what they did all agree on, and what is really crucial, is that heritability of BCS is around 25%, which makes it relatively heritable and therefore worth selecting for. They were also really clear about distinguishing between genetic and environmental or nutritional BCS. So before all the vets in the room lynch me, I need to be really clear. I'm not advocating obese animals from excessive feed. I'm encouraging farmers to find those animals that are suited to their environment, that naturally hold condition without needing any special treatment. So I was really fortunate to visit dozens and dozens of farmers in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Iceland, and the UK. And it really became apparent very quickly that fertility and animal health were the two biggest wins for those farmers using BCS as a key selection tool. What was notable, though, was that they all had different ways of implementing that selection, and it very much reflected the type of farm and the geography of the farms. So in northern Canada, where temperatures range from -40 in the winter to +40 in the summer, that need for good BCS is innate. And the ranchers there talked about it all the time. But they didn't actually measure or record it. The environment was the self-selecting aspect of those systems. Now, any animal that was unable to build up and hold enough condition in the summer and carry that through the winter ultimately just fell out of the system as she failed to rebreed. In Australia, the Lifetime U project identified BCS as the key to improving fertility and performance in their extensive low-cost, low-output systems. And similar to Canada, a lot of the commercial herds and flocks I visited tended to kind of assess BCS regularly, but they weren't recording it. And I think they relied really heavily on their pedigree breeders to do that work for them and supply them with males that were fit for purpose. Also in Australia and New Zealand, there were a number of merino breeders who were really focusing on putting fat and muscle back into their merino sheep after decades of singularly pursuing wool production. And it resulted in a big uptick in scanning, weaning rates, and lamb survival. And actually it was a really important reminder that singularly pursuing the extremes of one trait is never a good thing. It was also, I think, in New Zealand that it became really apparent that it was in those very cold and wet conditions, much like the Highlands, that BCS became really to the fore. The ability of those livestock to handle difficult conditions added so much resilience to those farms. And in New Zealand, as Miranda discussed, they've also been pushing the boundaries of genetic parasite resistance, and BCS is very crucial to that work. But we should never underestimate the UK as a world leader in agriculture, research, and knowledge transfer. There are a number of farmers and academics in this country who are really passionate about BCS and see the potential in it. And they record meticulously, make selection decisions accordingly, and they're making really great progress. But I think the important message I took away from all these visits is that you can make it as simple or as complex as you like, but so long as you are doing something, you're making progress. Aside from fertility and health, I briefly want to touch on some of the other potential opportunities presented through having genetically fatter livestock. The first is reduced bought-in or conserved feed, which comes back to our idea that fat animals eat less. If we can get weight on animals in summer when grass is cheap and plentiful, then they shouldn't need as much to keep them going through the winter. Secondly, stocking rate, which is widely regarded as one of the biggest drivers of profitability. And all the farmers and researchers I spoke to agreed that genetically better conditioned livestock could be run at increased stocking rates. Now, both those things actually neatly tie in to contribute to some good environmental outcomes as well. Less conserved or bought-in feed just means lower resource use. And higher stocking rates may present the opportunity to run the same number of sheep, but on a smaller amount of ground, potentially leaving other ground for habitat or woodland creation. But perhaps the thing I find the most important is the increased peace of mind that can come from having healthier, more robust and resilient animals. And along with a potentially lower workload and stress, there's just so much to be said for the comfort of knowing your costs are under control and your animals are fit and well. And Jason and I are both down here this week for 4 days. We're away from home, and we're pretty relaxed about that actually, because we know our stock at home are fit and healthy and happy. So it may be just a little bit of fat, but it can have really far-reaching consequences. And so there are so many reasons to get fired up about fat. So what is stopping us? Why do we not have animals that are better suited to our environment, that are healthier and more fertile, and that can make our lives easier? Now, in some ways, the answer is complex and nuanced and involves market forces, egos, culture, tradition, education, the list goes on. But the real answer is us. We, the commercial farmers. Now, if I had £1 for every time I heard a farmer trek off to the sale yard, only to come back and complain that the bull or ram they bought from the ring had melted when they got it home, I would have been able to visit a lot more countries as part of this scholarship. But if I had £2 for every time I saw that same farmer trek back to the same sale ring only to complain of the same problem, I might have travelled business class. Now, certainly the breeders and those that award prizes in the ring bear some of the responsibility. But we are responsible for the decisions we make about the animals we buy and those we sell. Every time we go to that sale ring and buy overfed animals that have not been subjected to any environmental or nutritional pressure, we signal to those breeders that we are happy with this arrangement, despite our knowledge that what we see may not be what we get. We accept that this is how it has always been, also described as the 7 most dangerous words in farming. If you're investing in genetics, which are going to influence your female's performance for the next 5 to 10 years, then it is worth getting it right. Now, thankfully, there are an increasing number of breeders, like Rob, producing bulls and rams under low input commercial conditions. And in the UK, we are lucky to have several breeds that record BCS as an EBV. Now, understand productivity and profit are not the only drivers in farming, and there are lots of things that are more important to me. But if we worry about the economic workload or environmental sustainability of our systems, then it is within our power to change. And if BCS drives fertility, health, productivity and profit, then surely that is a change worth making. Now, I've barely touched on the scope of this today, and it's much, much more complex than you might expect. But I think if I go on for much longer, Vicky's going to come on and tackle me. So if I could get one message across to commercial farmers and breeders, it is this: take the free lunch. Putting a bit more genetic body condition into our females will help our businesses, and it is easy to do. BCS is easy to assess and heritable enough that we can make gains. It need not be complex or technical. Breeders need to produce animals under commercial conditions, applied environmental selection, and let that cream rise to the top. Commercial farmers need to be willing to pay for that heavy selection when choosing their bulls and rams, and then they also need to carry out that selection on their own female livestock. This is just such an easy win, and it's an important step towards making health, wealth and happiness a ruminant reality. So with that, I'd like to finish by thanking everyone who has helped me to this point. There are far too many to mention, though some of you are in the room today. And it's difficult to express just how much I enjoyed meeting everyone and learning from them. Special thanks, though, to my husband, Jason, even though he woke me up at 5:30 this morning, who supports me in everything I do and has never complained once when I've disappeared off to a meeting or a travel, picking up the slack I leave behind. And as can be expected with Nuffield, I have learned and gained so much beyond my topic, and I cannot wait for the next adventure to begin. So thank you.